Even as Massachusetts hiked the minimum wage to $11 an hour this past January, the living wage movement argued, and is still working, for $15 an hour. But what if, instead of such constant leapfrogging, the government guaranteed each citizen a minimum income to meet basic needs? Guaranteed basic income, ahead on Wide Angle. Does a democracy have a vested interest in ensuring that none of its citizens live in poverty? That a permanent underclass not form? Would not a people free from the worry about food and rent, for instance, be more available to the work of remaining informed and politically active? For more than 5 centuries, people have not only debated these questions, but have sought to create a response for them. One such enduring idea is that of a government-insured payment given at varying time frames, depending upon proposal, in different amounts with differing criteria. Joining me to discuss a plan being increasingly discussed today is Michael Howard, professor of philosophy at the University of Maine and the coordinator of the U.S. Basic Income Guarantee Network. He is co-editor of the book Alaska's Permanent Fund Dividend, examining its suitability as a model, and currently co-edits Basic Income Studies, the International Journal of Basic Income Research. Welcome to Wide Angle, Professor Howard.
Glad to be here.
Thanks for joining me. I guess let's start with a basic understanding, yeah? My understanding is that it comes with many different names. It's known as the guaranteed annual income, the guaranteed minimum income, universal basic income, and the title your organization adopted, Basic Income Guarantee, amongst others. Regardless of what it's called, what are the basic ideas of basic income guarantee?
Yeah, there are a lot of different associations with these terms, but as we understand it in the U.S. Basic Income Guarantee Network, a basic income guarantee is a minimum income, usually understood to be adequate for basic needs, and it is a cash payment. It's universal, and it's unconditional. One does not have to meet any sort of behavioral requirements, willingness to work requirements to get it. And it comes in 2 varieties. One that was very popular, especially in the 1960s and 70s, is called the negative income tax. Negative income tax is means tested. It only goes to the poor, to the people who need it. What's more generally referred to as a basic income, as a variation of the basic income guarantee, goes to everybody. Bill Gates gets it as well as the poorest person.
Interesting.
And the advantage of that is that if everybody gets it, nobody falls between the cracks. It signifies that this is a benefit that you have just as a citizen of the country. And it avoids certain kinds of administrative costs that have to do with the means testing.
Right. Now, I guess it might be good to just explore what the counterpoint to this is. Now, basic income guarantee is different than income maintenance or income support programs that the U.S. government currently offers to citizens, yeah, depending upon need. And examples are food stamps, TAMP, temporary assistance for needy families. I guess Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security would be other examples of supporting people. So how does a basic income guarantee differ from those programs that people are familiar with?
Yeah, in lots of ways. Social Security is a contributory pension program. You pay into it, and then you get it back. And if you don't pay in, except with certain qualifications, you're not entitled to it. Right. Food stamps is not a cash benefit. It's like cash, but you can only use it for certain purposes. And there's a kind of paternalism built into that. Whereas a basic income would be a cash payment that people are free to use in whatever way that they think is appropriate.
Right.
And the main difference is that most of the benefits that you talked about are means tested. Even Social Security, most of them are means tested. Food stamps, SNAP benefits, assistance to needy families, all of those benefits you have to qualify for in terms of need, whereas a basic income goes to everybody regardless of need. And they're also conditional. Most benefits are conditional. They have a time limit, some of them. You have to prove that you are searching for employment. And there are other kinds of conditionalities attached. And if you don't meet those conditions, then you are deprived of the benefit. So the idea, the advocates of basic income see actually those conditionalities as part of the problem. They are obstacles to lifting people out of poverty. And in fact, they can trap people in poverty. If you receive, for example, a cash benefit that is conditional, as I say, unemployment benefits, conditional on your not being employed, then you have an interest in not having a job. Whereas if you have a basic income that's guaranteed regardless of whether you're employed or not, regardless of whether you're getting other sources of income, then you have every incentive to earn more income by going out and looking for additional work.
Sure. But I can imagine that some of the viewers would have questions that are pretty standard for a basic income guarantee. And I have a list of them, and maybe we take them in order. The first one is, geez, aren't people just going to be lazy if they have money being given to them?
Yeah, that's a very common objection, and I think it's in many people's minds. They're the first thing that comes to mind, and one of the big obstacles. But I would just point out first that in a way we already do this, not with the poor, but with the rich. People who inherit wealth, they can use it productively. They can use it as a springboard to become a more productive member of society, an investor, philanthropist, or they can become part of the idle rich. And on balance, I think a lot of people have concluded that it's worth the cost of a few idle rich to have a class of people who are there with a lot of money that they can invest and contribute to the economy. Now, whether or not you agree with that entitlement of wealthy people to their inheritances, I think we should take the same attitude toward the poor, that they should receive a part of the inheritance of our collective social wealth, which after all is due to natural resources that we as a country have, that it's due to the products of civilization. Some people may drop out, but most people will not simply want to sit in front of the television vegetating and collecting a bare minimum. They want to have useful lives. They want to have families. They want to make progress. They want to contribute to society. And we should think of basic income not as something to enable people to be lazy, rather as something that enables people to be more productive.
Okay. A slightly maybe more nuanced concern. It's being concerned about the morality of giving people things, money in this case, that they haven't earned. Is there a downside to that, Michael?
If there is, it's something we can already look around and search for, because there are lots of rentiers. And by rentiers, I mean people who collect income that is not based on their labor, but on what they own. So people who have stocks, bonds, rental properties, and they collect rent and interest. Those are rentiers, and they're getting unearned income. They may have earned the income at some point that enabled them to get those properties, but now they have rental income. And so if there's a problem with rental income, we should first look at the people that are now getting it. The idea of a basic income is just to share some of that rental income more widely, so that everybody has not only a stream of income that they get from their labor, but also a stream of income that they get from unearned wealth that we may share a little more equally than we do now.
And I guess maybe the last concern to raise here is for those who would suggest that government is best that governs least, and would this not be an example of government overreach?
Every modern capitalist society has some form of welfare state, because it's become very clear that there are people who are unemployed through no fault of their own because of periodic recessions. There are people who are disabled, and people who are children who whose parents, for one reason or another, do not have adequate employment for their food and their educational expenses. For all of these reasons, we have a state that provides transfers of income. Right. So I don't think that, unless one believes that there should be no transfers at all, and that would be quite extreme, we have a system of transfer payments. So it's a question of what kind of transfers and what form does it take. The basic income is really just changing some of the form that transfer takes. Right. And in fact, one might argue that a basic income is less government intrusive than some of the schemes we have in place now. Mm-hmm. You don't have a government officer coming to your house to see if there's a spouse or not. Right. You don't have people checking up on your behavior to see if you're looking for work. When you say you're looking for work, whether you actually are or not. Right. When you remove the conditionalities, you actually have a lighter hand of government.
Okay, and let's say that our viewers are on board, and we have consensus around the idea of a basic income guarantee. Of course, the devil's in the detail, right? And how does something like this get paid for? And certainly, in a country of our size, it would be a substantial amount of money. How do we fund this sort of proposal?
The most important thing to remember when we start talking about cost is to distinguish between the gross cost mm-hmm. and the net cost. Mm-hmm. And the gross cost is you simply take the amount of basic income you have in mind, you multiply it by the population. Mm-hmm. And if you differentiate between children and adults, you'll have two different amounts and multiply by those two different groups. Right. And you usually get something that comes out around $3 trillion if you're talking about, say, a basic income of $12,000 for every adult and $6,000 for every child. Now, that's the gross cost. Right. And when people hear that number, they say, this is nuts.
Sure.
We just, our economy can't afford that. That's way too much.
Yep.
Now, a colleague of mine, Carl Weiderquist, recently did a paper, which he did what he called a back-of-the-envelope calculation of the net cost. Uh-huh. And he came to the conclusion that it was only 16% of the gross cost, around $540 billion. Uh-huh. Much more affordable.
Okay.
And why there is that difference is because you have to look at the basic income as combined with our tax system. So everybody gets it, but some people are net contributors and others are net recipients. Okay. And the net contributors will pay more in taxes than they will get in the basic income. So they get the basic income, but then they pay a lot of it back. So the actual amount that is being given is below zero. Right. And for the net recipients, they too, if they make any income at all, will be contributing some to the basic income scheme. So the only person who gets a net $12,000 per year is the person who has zero income from other sources. Okay. Everybody who earns money on top of that will be contributing some percentage of taxes.
Okay.
So the net cost is what we have to focus on.
Okay.
Now, how do you pay for that? I guess would be the next question.
Exactly that.
Yeah, and there are lots of different ways of approaching this. Okay. One way would simply be, well, the first thing I think you would want to look at in any serious working out of an alternative to the system we have now is what would you replace in the existing system? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So you might do away with food stamps, for example. Yep. You might do away with temporary assistance to needy families. Yep. And replace it with the basic income of a comparable amount. Right. So it's quite possible that you could come close to paying for the basic income simply by eliminating many of the existing programs and replacing them with the basic income. It wouldn't cost us anything more than what we're now spending.
Right. Let's take a quick break if we can, Michael, and ask viewers to join us on the other side, where we'll discuss what the guaranteed basic income looks like out in the real world.
We'd love to hear your feedback. Email us at wideangle@acmi.tv. For information about this episode or to view other Wide Angle episodes, visit us online at acmi.tv/wideangle.
Welcome back to Wide Angle. I'm Peter Bermuda speaking today with Professor Michael Howard about the guaranteed basic income. The idea of a government-supported minimum income is something that was born in Europe over 500 years ago. Today, it finds its strongest allies, I believe, largely in Europe. And yet, we currently, in the United States here, have the longest running example of this basic idea, in what is called the Alaska Permanent Fund. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. The story starts in the 1960s when oil was discovered on Alaska's North Slope. And as this money began pouring into state government, because the government owned the land, and then they leased the property to oil drillers, and they had a big bonanza. And some people were worried that this money would just be wasted. And after the boom, Alaska would have a bust, and it would go down the tubes. So some far-sighted politicians, including Republican Governor Jay Hammond and people from both parties, decided to create the Alaska Permanent Fund. They would put 20% of this revenue coming from the oil into this fund so that future generations would always have the interest from that fund for their disposal. It was saving for the future. It was looking to future generations. It's a rare event, actually, to see something like this happening. They created what is more generally known as a sovereign wealth fund. And some other states, Norway and others, have followed in this track by creating a sovereign wealth fund. Now, what was distinctive in Alaska is that shortly after the creation of the permanent fund in the 1970s, early 1980s, they decided to use the interest coming from the fund to pay every Alaskan a dividend. And it started off a few $100s a year, and it's risen over the years. And it now typically runs between $1,000 and $1,500 a year, every Alaskan, children included. So a family of four might expect to get between $4,000 and $6,000 a year in any given year, depending on the performance of that fund. And it's essentially a partial basic income. It doesn't satisfy all the basic needs, but it certainly contributes to the income of a family. It will lift people who are near the poverty line out of poverty, and it will certainly improve the prospects for others. And it can't help but reduce the inequalities in Alaska.
Right. And I gather that Alaska stands amongst the 50 states as one of the how do I say it? The least unequal or the most equal. Is that right?
That's right.
All right. I gather, too, that there are a number of other cities, regions, countries around the globe that are experimenting with this basic income idea. Can you give us a sense of some of the projects out there and what's being found as a result of these projects?
Yeah. Some of the things that are just being started and that we'll want to watch for, but we don't yet have any results from, Finland has decided to do a basic income pilot project. And they've selected a lot of people who are currently receiving unemployment benefits. They're going to give some of them an unconditional basic income and then see how that compares with the conditional system. So that's one to watch for. Ontario is launching a basic income pilot project. And so we'll want to see what happens there. The Swiss had a referendum a couple of years ago to give everybody in Switzerland a basic income on the order of about $2,500 a month. Wow. It was really quite generous. It failed, but as the proponents say, the people supporting it increased from the time the campaign was launched to the time of the vote. And it's not the end of the matter, it's the beginning of a conversation. So we may see more coming out of Switzerland.
Interesting.
Some cities in the Netherlands are launching basic income pilot projects, and Scotland is talking about it. And the experiments that have already happened, and we can go into greater length in some of these, but there was a very important basic income pilot project in India, in Andhra Pradesh, A whole series of villages were studied. Some of them got the basic income, some of them did not. And the results of that were very interesting. Before the India pilot project, there was a pilot project in Namibia, in southern Africa, in a small village, and those results were very encouraging. And in the United States, it wasn't a government experiment, but the Cherokee Nation in the Carolinas, with income from their casino, decided to give everybody in the tribe an annual cash payment. And the results of that also, again, are quite interesting.
I'm imagining that coming out of these experiments is a bevy of data and information. One of them, I imagine, is that when people have the extra space that is generated as a result of feeling like the basic needs are meetable on a monthly basis, that other things can happen too, yeah? Unexpected things that we wouldn't necessarily pair with the idea of a basic income guarantee. A sense of some of those unexpected things that have blossomed in the midst of these experiments.
Yeah. Well, just to start with the experiment in India, these are very poor people. And one of the things that was found is that you think that people would get the income and they would just spend it all on immediate consumption needs. But actually, people saved the money. They would pool their money and do things like buy a sewing machine and then start a small textile business. They would invest in sanitation, put in sewer lines. They would purchase uniforms for their kids to go to school, books. In other words, they were using the money to invest in order to enable themselves to be more productive. Something very similar happened in Namibia. There was a worry there that if you just gave people free money, they would just go to the bars and drink. Well, in fact, alcoholism went down in the Namibia experiment because people used the income to enable themselves to come together and work as a community to address the problem of alcoholism. So, it's income is enabling. I think that's we need to think of it as enabling people to be more productive and more responsible. In the case of the Cherokee Nation, there an unexpected result was that problems with mental illness declined, and it's not exactly clear why that is. But one thought is that the stress that afflicts a household when it is chronically lacking income and unable to meet the bills, if you can address that chronic stress, it will have positive repercussions with respect to mental illness. In the Canadian case, the Mincom experiment, the policymakers were, in fact, a little too narrowly focused on the question of labor market withdrawal. People say, you give people income, they'll stop looking for work. And in fact, this was found to be true in Canada and in the cities in the United States. However, I think we need to look at the social goals a little more broadly and look at who it was that withdrew from the labor market. It was women with small children at home, and it was teenagers who had not yet completed high school. So the teenagers stopped working and they went back to school, and they finished high school. That's something we want.
With the additional income security that they had as a result of the project. Interesting.
And mothers, rather than going to work because they're chronically short of income and not adequately able to take care of their young children, they stay home with them. That's at least they have the choice to do that with the basic income. So that's a positive result.
Yeah. All right. So let's say, Michael, that some of the viewers are interested in this idea. Where do they turn for more information, be it organizations, websites, those sorts of resources?
Yeah, well, I'd encourage people first, go to the website that we manage in the U.S. Basic Income Guarantee Network. It's called usbig.net.
All right.
On that website, we have discussion papers for many of our past conferences. Peter Barnes, for example, there's a PowerPoint presentation of his book that you can find in that discussion paper series, and many other papers on the negative income tax experiments, and so on. The website of the Basic Income Earth Network, BIEN, they have excellent resources as well. They have their own discussion paper series from many conferences. It's also on that site that you can get basic income news, which comes out almost daily with stories about basic income experiments, discussions, research around the world. Also recommend some books. The most recent one to come out, I can show people here. It's just called Basic Income. And it's written by Philip van Parijs, who is probably the leading philosopher and economist writing about basic income. He was one of the co-founders of Basic Income Earth Network years ago. And Yannick van der Borgt. And it's called Basic Income, a Radical Proposal for a Free Society and a Sane Economy. And this has many of the arguments we've talked about here and others besides dealt with great subtlety and care.
Well, Michael, I thank you certainly for taking the time to speak with me today, as well as for what I gather is your scholarship on this subject and your ability and willingness to articulate it for people such as myself, visitors to the U.S. Big website as well.
It's been a pleasure to be here.
Good. Especially as we approach the uncertainty of the next 2 decades and the destabilizing job displacements we're warned they'll bring, it seems wise to begin exploring, in earnest, plans for protecting the most vulnerable amongst us. And the guaranteed basic income that we discussed today is one plan at the top of the list for many, with business and technology leaders amongst the most vocal. Proposals such as this, that require a different way of seeing and doing things, will no doubt require flexibility to consider and enact. But we Americans are, if nothing else, an adaptable lot, thankfully. For while the dominant motif in our country's prologue was rugged individualism, our next chapter will demand of us rugged interdependence. On behalf of Michael Howard, I'm Peter Bermudez. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Wide Angle.